everybody, thank you very much for joining us for this Allen&Heath webinar, Digital Mixers for Integrators. I'm David, I'm from the marketing team, and I'm joined today by two of my colleagues from the product marketing team. That's Nick and also Ian.
Hi.
Hi everyone.
So here's an overview of what we'll be talking about today. We're going to be looking at the key features of our digital mixing systems for integrators. We'll be talking in a bit more detail about some of the new additions to the Q series, the very compact QSB and also the Q-Control app. We'll be looking at IP control for our flagship D-Live series. We'll be looking at how to control our mixers using third-party control. We'll get into some case studies and we'll look at application diagrams, plus some of the other resources we've got on our website to help you with your work. And we'll finish off with a question and answer session. You should see in the GoToWebinar interface, there's a box there to ask your questions. Please use that during the webinar if things occur to you, or at the end for the question and answer session, and fire any questions you like at us and we'll do our very best to answer them. Before we get into all that, I know that some of you are very familiar with our range, but others may not be. So here's just a very, very brief overview of our three core digital mixing systems. And I say systems because it's more than just consoles or mixers. The box with the faders on it is the heart of an ecosystem. We call them ecosystems. These things that surround the product, the audio racks, the iPad apps, the personal mixers and so on. So this is Q. This is our compact digital mixing series. There are a number of different models in the series, including the new ones that Ian will talk about in a few minutes. And Q is a very, very easy to use system, very versatile and proving very popular. In the middle of the range, we have GLD, our most established digital mixing system, and one that really gained us our great reputation for ease of use. This is a product that's found itself a home in many, many houses of worship, in AV, in conferencing, and in lots of multi-purpose venues. And again, you can see that GLD is surrounded by this ecosystem that supports the product. And finally, the flagship, our most recent digital mixing system, that's D-Live, often described as a pro touring series, and indeed it is out on tour with a number of very big bands around the world, but it's also very well suited to the installation market, partly because of its very architecture that Nicole will get into later. And again, it's supported by an ecosystem of products, some exciting new ones that we haven't launched fully yet, which Nicole will pick up in a while.
Hi everyone, I'd just like to go through a few key features that we have specifically for installers and integrators. DSnake is our proprietary network protocol. It's an evolution of ACE, and it can be found on products such as GLD, Q, AB and AR racks, and the ME personal mixing systems. There's 64 channels of bidirectional audio. This is constrained to the console architecture. For instance, there are 40 channels implemented on ME. DSnake is a true plug-and-play protocol. There's no setup required via computer software. No configuration is stored in the unit. And firmware updates are automatically pushed from the mixer. There is an extended cable distance up to 120 meters. Even with the best intentions, containment systems can overrun the stipulated 100 meters of most Ethernet data, so any additional distance is well received. We have Cat5 drums available, which are tested and verified. And any Cat5 cable from well-known brands terminated correctly would perform to this 120 meter distance. If extra distance is needed, you can use fiber optic converters. Depending on the converter type and fiber infrastructure, it'll depend on the distance you can get from it, but typically you could get 2 kilometers over multi-mode and 15 kilometers over single mode. Latency in the system is very small at 5 samples at 48K. This is consistent in a point-to-point system. If we have a look at a couple of of our competitors' latencies there. You see DSnake does quite well at 0.104 milliseconds. Our Dante products ship at 1 millisecond. You can see you can actually get the system down to 0.15, going all the way through there to CobraNet, languishing behind there at 1.33. One of the most common questions we get regarding DSnake is whether it can be used with Ethernet switches. The answer is yes. It's a layer 2 standard, which means it can be switched but not routed. And we would advise to use a dedicated layer 2 network for transporting any DSnake stream. This will ensure maximum bandwidth allocation and minimize disruption in the form of audible artifacts. If you do need to use a converged network, such as putting a lighting system with a streaming ACN on there, we would recommend segregating the networks into dedicated VLANs and ensure protocols such as spanning or multiple spanning tree, broadcast storm protection, and tagged egress packets are all disabled. As discussed earlier, using switches will affect some of the points that we discussed, such as you'll be able to get greater distances. Each switch will reclock the audio, so in each switch hop you'll be able to get another 100 meters. But unfortunately, it will add a little bit more latency to the system. The next feature I'd like to touch upon is AMM, or automatic mic mixing. This is a perfect tool for conferences and meetings where multiple mics can be open at the same time. It minimizes background noise like hiss and rumble. Manual fader adjustments are no longer necessary, and it avoids the risk of feedback or mistakes. We use two types of AMM here at Allen&Heath. We use NOM AMM, or number of open mics, which is the traditional gating AMM with a set system gain. The NOM circuit then will detect the number of mics open in the system and will attenuate the overall gain accordingly. We also use a gain sharing algorithm called D-Classic, where the gain is shared across all inputs. A premix is then fed into a ratio comparator, and gain is adjusted to share the available gain across all the inputs. On our various products, on Q we implement the gain sharing algorithm. We have 16 channels of AMM with priority gain assignments via the faders. On GLD we implement both NOM and D-Classic. We have up to 44 channels of AMM. Priority chair assignments are enabled via the chair radio buttons at the top of the channel strip. Each of the 44 channels will have the same priority. The last point I'd like to touch upon is user permissions. We have three types of user permissions in our racks. We have admin, standard, and basic. The admin will have full control of the mixer setup. Standard will restrict certain features, such as the setup menu, and basic will restrict users to the most basic of functions, such as just the use of queue control. We can also set passwords for our QU personal mixing app and also queue control, which we'll touch upon again in a minute. Just like to have a look now at some of the products that we have in the Q range. So for those of you who are not familiar with our products, the Q started off as a traditional mixer design with a 16, 24, and 32. We then later added to that range with the Q Pack, which is an ultra portable rack mount version with touchscreen and a Q control function. Right up to our latest offering, which is the QSB, which is a totally headless mixer with control coming all from iOS apps. Speaking of which, Q Control is our latest iOS app. It's a simple end user interface for our Q Mixer range, and we see typical uses for scene management, source selection, and remote volume. Just going to go into a quick demonstration of the Q Control app. Just switch to the iPad here. So if we choose, I've got a QSB set up here in the room. If we just connect and choose admin. So there you'll see the 5 tabs at the bottom of the app. each tab can have up to 15 widgets. So that's a total of 75 widgets or controllable parameters in total. Swipe from the left and you get a menu tab where you can edit. You click on a widget and you can choose from a number of parameters. We scroll through, and if we assign that one a soft key and apply, close, and there we have a recall scene. The widgets can be moved around like a traditional iPhone or iPad app. As you can see, you can just delete just by clicking the delete button. You can also rename each tab at the bottom to whatever you'd like to call it. And you can see here I have a hypothetical system setup where I have a lectern, a bar, cinema, and a live setup. We can also set the background. It's a nice little feature where you can add a custom graphic or corporate logo. And sorry, I'll just go back there. As you can see, you have a little radio button here where you can choose that graphic to be on all tabs or just the tab that you're editing at the moment. So the last thing I'd like to go through is where we have the 5 tabs across the bottom. Sometimes you may just want to restrict the user to just one tab, like the person behind the bar who just want the bar control. In order to do this, you have to go out of the app into the settings of Q Control, and there you can see we can lock off the tabs that user does not require. If we go back into the app, it's a little bit slow at starting up. And we log out and log back in again. And there you go, you just have the one tab available. So that's it for the Q Control demo. So device compatibility is across the range. So we've got iPad mini, Air Pro, iPhone, and iPod Touch. And you'll need to be running iOS version 9.3 or higher in order to use Q Control. You can use up to 8 devices running Q Control or QU at the same time. 7 with a system with an iPad running QPad. However, Q Control does support multitasking, so that iPad in theory could have Q Control as the side-loaded app and still retain your 8 devices. We see various applications for Q Control, one of them being a wall mount iTouch or iPhone behind bar or restaurant, or we could have a podium mount for presentations or house of worship. You can have your presentation software running and then bring in your side app for small little adjustments. A couple of applications. Here you can see a nightclub application where we have I had the laser pointer there, where we have a QSB in a nightclub situation where we have VIP lounges, a bit of local control from the Q Control app. We have a DJ mixer going into the QSB and some local inputs from these lounges, a bit of third-party control, the PAVA system, and then the outputs going off to a 100-volt line distributed system on the main speakers and a bit of fill. And then the next application we have a GLD system. This is more of a traditional setup with front of house and monitor desk. We have some remote audio from our AB racks, which are taking inputs from the stage and then distributing outputs to the monitors. We also have a AR84 high-level rack room taking in some show relay mics and distributing out to the main PA and to an IR system. We also have some Dante networking going on in this application, and again we have third-party control, PAVA system, and GLD one mix, GLD controller. We see applications for this in such outlets such as retail outlets, bars, nightclubs, corporate boardrooms, house of worship, and multi-purpose venues.
I just want to highlight now a handful of the case studies we've got from our website, which talk about the use of our digital mixers in the real world. Starting with this one in Sydney, this is St Andrews. It's actually a cathedral rather than a church in Sydney, a 19th century building. And as is so often the case, they have day-to-day services which don't require a hands-on operator of the mixer. They have a Q16 there. They just want something which can be used by anybody. And so the installer has put in a custom iPad GUI, which allows the day-to-day user to control the whole system without going anywhere near the mixer. But when they have their largest services, where there's a trained operator, the Q16 is there for hands-on control. This is the Krakow Arena in Poland. Again, it's a very flexible venue. They've got two main spaces which host a wide variety of different events. So what they've done is they've gone for a GLD80 as their main mixer, and they've got AR2412 and AR84 audio racks to go with that. But because DSnake is shared by both GLD and Q, that allows them to connect not only their GLD80, but also they've got a couple of Q16 mixers in the venue. They can connect those to those audio racks as well. So they can look at each event and address it appropriately with the Q16 running the event or the GLD80, or for the biggest shows, they can use both together. And this is very much an automatic mic mixing application. This is the Museum of Communications in Frankfurt. And once more, a venue that hosts a very wide variety of events, from live music to speeches. But also, one of the things they do a lot of is panel discussions, which, if anybody has tried to mix one without AMM or has watched someone trying to do so, is one of the hardest challenges, I think, in mixing, because you don't know who's going to be speaking next. So this was a crucial feature for them when they chose Q16, and they're using AMM there to very good effect.
So now DLive. David has touched briefly on the flexibility of the system for permanent installation, and we are seeing a lot of customers deploying DLive in fixed install, where they need not only a mixing system but also a distribution system where they can take something like up to 800 system inputs, be it digital or analog or Dante, MADI, Ethersound, any protocol you like, and route them to about the same number of system outputs in a big installation or matrix system. I'd like to introduce you to a couple of additions to the DLive series, which expand the ecosystem and the flexibility of the system even further into installation. The IP6 and IP8, they are remote controllers for DLive. They're fully networkable, which means that you can run them on a standard Ethernet or TCP/IP network alongside any other TCP/IP traffic. They're also PoE compliant, so they give you the convenience of a single Cat5 cable to distribute control and power to the devices. And you can run up to 16 of each in a single DLive system. They have LCD display screens with key information on the channel name or number and the channel color, and also a level bar, a meter, and the status and function of the two keys assigned to the same strip. So whether they control a mute or a select or a PFL and so on. They are both soft programmable, which means that you can configure the IP8 or IP6 using a DLive surface, or you can use the Mac or Windows Director software. So you can prepare a configuration even before you connect them live on a system and start configuring and assigning all of the functions and controls before you actually commission an installation in a venue. Now, the IP6 comes with 6 push and turn rotary encoders. Push and turn means that they have a dual function. So normally they control, say, the level of a channel, but you can access the pan control by pushing and turning the knob. It can be configured with up to 6 layers. So if you see the row of soft keys of backlit keys on the bottom row, those keys can be configured for layer control, which means that you can control up to 36 individual channels with a single IP6 device. As we said, it's PoE compliant, and it shares the same chassis as our Mi-1 personal monitoring system. So if you're familiar with Mi-1, you might know that it has a number of options and mounting options, including a threaded hole on the bottom of the chassis to mount it on top of a mic stand. But also there's a bracket available should you want to mount it on the side of a mic stand. And there's also a headphone holder, an optional headphone holder, which mounts on the bottom of the chassis. The IP8 comes with 8 motorized faders, 60 mils motorized faders, and again 6 layers. So in this case, you can access up to 48 discrete channels or masters. It is compliant with the PoE Plus standard. That's the highest of the two standards of PoE. So if you're buying a third-party switch or PoE injector, make sure that it complies with this standard. And again, you can use it freestanding or mount it in a plinth or any installed furniture. I have a few examples of applications for the IP6 and IP8. And in this first example, this is a generic installation. It could be an educational venue, or it could be a theater or a house of worship, where we have a DM32 mix rack with some expander boxes. And you might notice that there's no D-Live surface pictured in this diagram. And the reason is that you don't need one necessarily. So D-Live as a system has its brain power in the mix rack, which means that for many installations, a surface might not be required at all, or might only be used for occasional use when an engineer is present. So for the day-to-day operator, you can configure IP6, IP8 devices. In this case, we're showing an IP6 mounted in the lectern. So you can use it for simple level control of microphones in the room, or maybe music levels and background music source selection. And of course, if you need to set them up and configure them, you can run Director on a Mac or PC, so you don't need a Surface for the installation. The second example is what we call a hybrid mixing solution. So you can have a physical D-Live surface, you can double it with or couple it with D-Live Director running on Mac, Windows, or a Windows Surface tablet to roam around the venue with the convenience of tablet touch control. And you can add as well IP6 or IP8 devices for additional control, for example, at the monitor's position, or maybe as a little sidecar or extender for your D-Live surface. So typically when the engineer wants to run, to use up all of the faders on the physical surface for the inputs, you can add an IP8 beside the surface and configure it to control your master levels and mix and select keys as well, so that it works in conjunction with your surface. This other example is a surfaceless control, a more compact system where you can have a DM32 with 1 or 2 expanders. And again, you can run all the setup and configuration and processing on a Mac or Windows laptop. But if you want tactile, hands-on control, you can add an IP8 or multiple IP8s for fader control of up to 48 channels or multiple of 48. And the last example is personal monitoring. So we are seeing an increasing number of personal monitoring applications, especially in houses of worship in the US and beyond, and in Europe as well. Where typically the operator behind the console is a volunteer, and most of the musicians want to have personal control over their mixes. So in this case, the IP6 and IP8 are ideal. IP8 can be used for controlling a mono mix, for example, to wedge monitors, and IP6 is particularly suited for linear mixes because of the push and turn pan control. And they obviously control mixes in the DM mix rack. So that's convenient because your mix output will go out of the DM mix rack and into your in-ear transmitters, which are typically located in the same rack position. So I'm going to show you a few examples of how you would configure these IP controllers using DLive Director. And DLive Director is also a very good educational tool. So you can use it, you can download it for free from our website, and you can use it to familiarize with the IP6, IP8 configuration, but also with the rest of the functionality of the DLive system. So the IP control parameters are found in the surface or mix rack menu. And there is a reason for that, and it's regardless of where you physically connect them with the Cat5 cable. So you can use any network connection on your system, on surface, rack, or any other networked switch or device. But regardless of that, you can then choose to set them up on the mix rack or surface. So on the mix rack, they basically become independent controllers which can run with or without a DLive surface connected to the system. If you set them up on the surface, then they can share some functions with the DLive surface. For example, the select and mix keys, so that if you select something on an IP8, for example, it will also select that channel for the DLive surface, and so on. So to start with, let's configure a device on the mix rack. You can see we have already a device present in the system, which is shown with a little green icon, which means that it's linked, it's connected, it's recognized, and it's synchronized and working. I can choose any other memory location and I can start configuring those, so I don't need to connect the devices physically to prepare the configuration. So I have two ways of assigning functions and parameters. One is the advanced menu, where I can go and touch on any function, any key, any rotary control, and choose what I want that key to be assigned to. For example, a mute for an input channel, and apply. There's a much easier way of doing that, which is to use the quick setup. So if I want to assign a bunch of channels, for example, in this case, let's take channel 13 to 18, I can drag them down, and those of you who are familiar with DLive will recognize this interface is the same that we use for the strip assignments on the surface. So the concept is similar. I can drag down the channels I need, and this will be automatically configured on your IP6 device, in this case, with a set of default functions, which are typically the mute and PFL for these channels. If you want to change these default functions, you can hold down Setup or touch Setup on Director and touch anywhere on the screen, and you can choose the default functions that the Quick Setup utility will auto-assign to the IP devices for any selected strip. So I can do the same with my surface connection. So IP controllers, I can add an IP device. Let's use an IP8 in this case. And I can assign it to control, for example, my master mixes, all of my auxes. And if I choose multiple layers down here, the system will activate up to 3 or 6 layers for me, so that if I drag down my strips, they will automatically wrap up to any following layer. So I've got control of all of my aux master level, for example, on the IP8 alongside a physical DLive surface, which controls the inputs. Now, the last thing I want to mention is that all of these settings, so the strip assigns, the number of IP controllers assigned to my system, they are part of the scene memories in DLive. So if you start assigning functions and then you recall a different scene accidentally, you might lose the assignment. So of course, you can undo the scene recall and go back. But what we'd recommend is to make sure that your IP controller settings and assignments are saved in the global scene save menu under scenes. So I can go and select all of my IP6 and 8s in my system, whether they're connected or not at the moment, and make sure that they are safe. Okay, so I hope I didn't bore you too much with this demo, and we'll go back to the presentation now.
I certainly wasn't bored, Nick. I think Director is an incredibly powerful tool. So I'd just like to talk through a handful more case studies, or specifically on DLive. And we'll start in wonderful Sweden, where DLive has had so much success. There are probably more DLive systems per capita in Sweden than any other country in the world. This is a concert hall in, I hope it's pronounced something like Örebro in Sweden. Now, this is a venue where they have 3 different spaces, and the variety of events they host is quite extreme. So sometimes they have a stand-up comedian, which is not the most demanding thing in terms of audio, but sometimes they have visiting orchestras. So what they opted for is 2 DM5000 DLive surfaces, and they've got a DM32 and a DM64 rack. They've also got 3 DX32 expander racks, and all of these things are mobile, so they can deploy them as they need to across these 3 different spaces, almost like having an in-house rental company. And something they benefit from is, because they often have to provide a lot of different feeds, particularly for broadcast, it's worth noting that DLive systems between a surface and a rack have 5 audio networking ports, so they can provide Dante, MADI, and so on. Now, broadcast is an area we've seen a lot of interest in DLive. And this was one of the first broadcast applications. This is in the Netherlands, RTV Drenthe, which is a regional TV, radio, and online broadcaster. And the reason we've highlighted this is because this mixer is actually in the newsroom itself, and it's used by a wide variety of people. Newsrooms tend to be very, very busy environments. And the people that have their hands on this mixer are not just highly trained people, but also people with only a passing acquaintance. But because the user interface of DLive is so intuitive, it's used by all. And finally, this is one of the many, many houses of worship that are invested in DLive. This is Dream City in Phoenix in the United States. And it's one of those houses of worship where the channel counts can get very, very large, particularly around those key times of year. And what they've gone for is a DLive S7000, the largest surface in front of house, with a DM64 rack and a DX32 expander rack. So they've got a very powerful, very capable system. In the expander rack, they've gone for the AES in and AES out modules, which allows them to serve the church's digital video feed. And Nicola was talking a few minutes ago about the Me personal mixing system. This is one of those houses of worship where they've invested in a MeU hub and in 10 Me1 personal mixers. So the musicians can look after their own monitor mixers, and the audiovisual team can stay focused on providing a great front of house sound.
So another common question we get here at Allen&Heath is whether our products can be controlled by third-party systems such as Crestron, AMX or Extron. Well, the answer to that is yes. We use a MIDI over TCP/IP protocol. Supported products for control are GLD and Q at present. And the available commands will depend on the product, but such things such as mutes, faders, mixes, input channel sources, channel names, scene recalls, just to name a few. If you dig out the document, and it'll give you a list of the available commands at the beginning of the document. I'd just like to go through a quick scene recall example. So here we have a generic system in a multi-purpose venue where we have a permanent installation of maybe some mics, some ceiling speakers, and then we can have a portable system come in the evening and be connected into wall panels for plugging your iPod in and plugging the speakers in. So we have a Crestron system plugged into the network with the Q-Pack, The first thing we need to make sure is we're all within the same IP range, on the same subnet, and pointing towards the QPAC TCP port 51325. We then need to dig out the protocol document. So depending on the product you're using, go to the product page, go to the Documents tab, and there at the bottom you'll find the PDF of the protocol. And scroll through to the scene recall command. There you'll see we have a command called saying CNSS. Everything in blue is a hexadecimal value. Everything in green is a variable, and these variables are in tables at the back of the document where you can transpose whichever scene that you need. So the CN in this example represents the MIDI channel, with N being the variable. So MIDI channel 1 would be C0. SS represents the scene number. You can have up to 100 scenes with Q. And that's represented by hexadecimal value 00 to 63. So to recall scene 1, you would simply fire the command C000. One thing to note is if something doesn't happen, you need to be in bank 1. So in order for the mixer to take the scene recall command, then you need to set that command up as shown there at the bottom hexadecimal value. So if we send the string C000 in the system, it will take away the portable system and just leave you with the permanently installed system. And likewise, in the evening, in comes the portable system. You fire off C001, and away goes the install system, and in comes the portable system. So finally, I'd just like to go through a couple of the implementations we made to our website recently. I just switched to a browser here. So you'll see we've added a solutions section to our website. For those who are not too familiar with our website, we're trying to align our products with the various vertical markets within installation. So you'll see we've got everything there from retail, corporate, leisure, education. We've also added some tabs at the bottom for live touring, studio and broadcast applications also. So if we go into the House of Worship, you can see we've added some application examples. So we go through from a small application when using a GR, medium using Q, a medium large with GLD, a bit of networking, and right up to our flagship D-Live products. And if you scroll further down, then we place some of the relevant case studies. You can have a read through and see where these products are actually going in around the world. You scroll down further, we'll give you some recommended products. And then right at the bottom, we have a form fill, which you guys can use to get in contact directly. It'll go straight to the marketing people here at ALLEN&HEATH, and they will forward that to me directly. So any questions you have regarding pre-tender advice or any systems design, or any questions regarding the installation that you're carrying out, and even afterwards, if you've got any marketing material for us, for any projects that you've completed, please get in touch. And that is it. Any questions?
Yeah, Ian, while you're on the website, you might
Sorry.
want to touch on this because there's a question coming in about whether we have AutoCAD files and architectural specs for our products, for our digital mixers. So do you want to share the document tab maybe of a typical product, Q or...
Yeah, so if we go to the QPAC, if we go into the documents, so we have all the CAD drawings, all the documents that you need within the Documents tab, getting started guides, all the CAD drawings in DWG formats, and down there you'll see the MIDI protocol that we were just speaking about. So everything there is within in the Documents tab on the relevant product page.
Yeah, thanks. So please, guys, do send in any question you might have. We have just a few at the moment. One of these is about something you mentioned earlier on about the extra latency when you use a switch to connect to DLive products, for example, a stage box and a surface. Now, we said DSnake has about 100 microseconds of latency. The extra latency that a switch would add, we have done some calculations with some of our products, and it's I would say it's negligible. So we're talking nanoseconds, which in a typical audio application is really not critical. Typically, the latency becomes critical when you're into the milliseconds. All of our systems are very low latency in terms of processing, so input to output. That adds to a very low latency on the transport portion of it, so adding one or two switches wouldn't critically affect the performance of the system. Any other question, please use the questions panel.
Okay, I've had a question come through. Someone spotted on the slide about Q that we now offer mic presets for the Q series. Can you just tell us a little bit more about those?
Yeah, of course. So starting in version 1.9 firmware, we decided to team up with some of the leading microphone manufacturers, Shure and Sennheiser to start with, but we're also working with Audio-Technica at the moment to release a number of presets which are tailored to some specific popular microphones in use in the field, in the industry. So we had engineers from Shure and Sennheiser and Audio-Technica developing these presets with us. So they're not just marketing material, they're actually developed to give you the best possible starting point for a specific microphone. And these are available in the 1.9 firmware, but also available as a separate download from our website, where you can find more presets available for from these manufacturers.
Also, got a question about the maximum input and output count on a DLive system. We've talked quite a lot about the different rack sizes and expanders available, but could you give us some figures on just how big a DLive system can get?
I touched on that, as you say. So with DLive, DLive has got a very high system scalability, if you like. So the DM racks are up to 64 physical inputs, analog inputs, and 32 outputs on the largest model. But on top of that, you can add up to 3 DX32 expanders in a system, which will give you another set of inputs and outputs, up to 32 inputs or outputs per expander. And then a typical DLive system with a rack and surface also has 5 networking slots, each one capable of up to 128 channels bidirectionally at 96 kilohertz. So you can see that if you stack up all of the options, you end up with a very big system of about 800 system inputs and outputs, so you can freely route from any input to any number of outputs without using any of the mixing resources of the desk.
I think that should be enough for most applications. I've got a question about the IP remotes. People may be familiar with the PL series remotes that have been used with our iLive series and also our IDR series. What's the difference between the comparable models in the IP and the old PL?
The main difference is that the PL devices or PLA net or Planet, as someone were calling them, were based on an RS485 communication line, which was using Cat5 cables, but not Ethernet packets, not Ethernet traffic. So they weren't really compatible with Ethernet infrastructures and switches. The IP6 and IP8 are fully compatible with TCP/IP. And also they are compatible with the PoE standard, as we discussed earlier. Some of the other advantages is that by using new technology, we are able to pack in the same size of unit, new features like LCD color displays and motorized faders. There's a question that just came in from Dalton. He's designing a system for a church in Canada, and is asking whether we offer any sort of project price protection on products. This is not something that we would offer as a manufacturer, but what I would suggest is that you get in touch with Ericsson Pro, our ALLEN&HEATH distributor in Canada, and they might be able to assist you with pricing discussions. There's a question from Ralph about the fader count for the D-Live surfaces. We have 3 D-Live surfaces, the S3000, S5000, and the S7000. The fader count goes from the 20 faders on the smallest one to the 28 faders of the middle one and 36 faders of the largest model. So you have the 3 variants all available depending on the application.
There's a question here about the house of worship market and about personal mixers. We've talked a lot about our own Me system, but we're being asked if there's a house of worship that already has a number of Avium personal mixers, can they still be used with our systems? It doesn't specify whether we're talking about Q, GLD, or D-Live here.
Yes, they can be used with Me1. So, for example, in an Avium installation or an installation where Avium is already in use, Me1 can be used as a kind of drop-in replacement for one of the Avium units. So if you want to start by swapping one unit and testing out Me1 in terms of audio quality or usability, workflow, you can do it just by replacing one unit. And then later on, you can maybe switch to a fully fledged Me1 system. The other thing to mention is that Me1 can also be used in conjunction with the IP6 and IP8. So again, it doesn't mean that because you go with a Me1 system, you cannot use IP6 for personal monitoring. You might want to use Me1 for wired headphones on the stage, given the stereo headphone output that you have on the unit. And at the same time, have a number of IP6 controllers on the same D-Live system, controlling mixes in the mix rack that go out to in-ear transmitters. Tim Schaefer is asking whether D-Live has any external control capability from Crestron or AMX. Yes, it does, Tim. Basically, it shares the same protocol that we use in our GLD mixer. It's already working, although we haven't published a spec protocol document at the moment because we're still resolving an issue with higher channel counts. So basically, the current protocol will address channel 1 to 64, but nothing beyond that. So we want to address that before we actually release the document to the public. But in some installations, we have customers that have already happily used the protocol for external control. There's a question from Alex about using different sample rates in a system, in a digital system. So, for example, having a GLD as a front of house desk and a D-Live as a monitor console. What D-Live does in this case is whenever you fit it with any of the existing option cards, like Dante, MADI, EtherSound, for linking to a GLD or an iLive system, its sample rate converts automatically down to 48 and then back to 96 on the inputs. So that's seamless for the user. You don't have to set up any setting at all. It just happens behind the scenes for you. Michael Palmer just corrected me on the question regarding Avian compatibility. He pointed out that the compatibility only applies to the Pro 16 protocol from Avian, which is basically the one that they use for the very popular A16 II personal mixer, but not with the most recent A360 or A320, which use a different protocol. That's correct, Michael. Thanks. So I think that's the end of the questions. Thank you very much for joining us today and for attending the webinar. I hope that it was useful for you. And goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.